So good morning. I think it should be morning for everybody. I'm Julian Burns. I'm the principal at Red Cypress Consulting. Almost more like evening. I apologize. This is an international conference, 6 p.m. Would love if folks, as we get started here, want to kind of start dropping some locations into the chat here. Would love to hear where everybody's dialing in from. As I was saying, Julian Burns, Red Cypress Consulting. We're a small agency based in New Orleans, Louisiana, that provides a range of communications and technology services to progressive nonprofits and political campaigns. One of our core practices is around the idea of technology adoption, which is sort of an umbrella term that we'll talk about more today, but focused on actually helping get the tools that you need into your hands and useful. Today's session, of course, Candy Crush, how to get your team hooked on new tech. We're going to be talking about an approach that we've been piloting for the last couple of years, based on the addictive game Candy Crush. So today's overview, always kind of by reflex put intros in here. It's a little bit harder. Finland, fantastic. Bridgeport, Seattle, couple Atlanta, awesome. Always put intros. I think it's amazing how the NetRoots team has adapted to technology here. This conference has been awesome. I still wish I was in a room with you all, but here we are. So we'll start with cities, and then there will be other opportunities to share a little bit of what brought you to the session, what you're struggling with. I want this to be participatory. Please feel free to drop questions in as we go, and I'll try to catch them and answer them to the best of my ability. Alabama, San Diego, Sacramento. I love we got a big South contingent here, which is rare. Okay, we're gonna see exactly how much my cat interrupts this session, which is just like very, very par for the course. So everybody say hello to Lunchbox. She's gonna go on the floor for now. Cool. So we'll start talking about what is technology adoption. We're gonna talk a little bit about the game Candy Crush, why we're talking about it, and then we're gonna talk about the lessons that we can learn from it. Knoxville, Los Angeles, awesome. Welcome. Great to have you all here. Okay, so why are we talking about technology adoption? We're talking about technology adoption because we have a lot of room to grow as a movement. No shade to any tech vendors who might be on the call. Love you all. So appreciate the work you're doing, building technology for a movement. We need you. But sometimes you can get the feeling from the best case scenario for how technology can be used, that the way that progressive organizing in 2020 is this super futuristic. All the data is integrated, all the technology is integrated, and with the touch of a button, we're mobilizing people around the country, right? What our organizing actually looks like a lot of the time is a lot of flip charts, a lot of paper, a lot of phone calls, right? And a lot of workarounds, and a lot of technology that doesn't work the way that it's supposed to for us, that is being underutilized, or is not a good fit. And this, of course, is you know, in a little bit of a pressure cooker in this pandemic time, where you know, in some ways, we're I think that there's been an enormous amount of growth in the progressive movement, in adopting technology over the last 6 months. We've seen a lot of the organizations that we work with really, you know, have some big breakthroughs, because we have to, right? We have to reach our people where we can reach them. We have to exercise power in the ways that we can exercise power. We have to communicate through the channels we have to communicate, when it's much harder to get people together in person, and to use some of the, you know, the old methods that we used for organizing and campaigning. But at the same time, you know, it's also exposed some of the, you know, some of the continued challenges, and you know, ways that we still need to grow. So when we're talking about technology adoption, we're talking about technology adoption because we need to bring the reality closer to that vision that's super exciting, but that we often fall short of, right? And specifically, we're talking about trying to, you know, make sure that when we set out to adopt, to integrate a new tool into the way that we work, that we actually get to the point where it's helping us, right? Just to get a sense of where folks are kind of coming to this from, if anybody has like a specific tool or technology that you're interested in adopting, that you want to integrate into your team, organization you're a part of or work with, a campaign that you're a part of, that you're trying to figure out, how do we actually get to that point? If you could drop that in the chat, what those tools that you're thinking about are, that you want to adopt, that would be great. Yeah, the pandemic has made orgs admit that they don't have the digital skills. I think that's really true. It has been absolutely, you know, a reckoning moment, I think, for all of us, and you know, and have to hope that we're going to come out a lot stronger as a result. But so let's dig in a little bit more granularly and talk about you know, what some of those stumbling blocks are. This presentation comes out of work that I and my colleagues at Red Cypress have done with a range of progressive organizations over the last several years. And we had the opportunity to do a couple projects with networks of organizations that doubled as you know, sort of concrete interventions and as research projects. And so we were able to spend a bunch of time you know, asking dozens of organizations the same questions and getting a sense of where folks were at. And you know, what we found was we found a number of the same issues coming up over and over and over again. And so here are some of the most common ones. I think a lot of these are not going to be shocking, right? Money is a big barrier to getting the tools that you need. So is having the capacity, having the time and the training to know how to use them, to know how they can be useful, and to actually put in the work of using them and setting them up and implementing them. and that expertise. But there's some that are, maybe a little bit less obvious, like getting everyone on the same table about it, having good options out there, and knowing what to choose. And then there's lots of other things that came up here. That have come up in the organizations we've worked with and talked to, that are a little bit more specific to those organizations, like language. If you're organizing in a language other than English, there's a lot of tools that could be great fits otherwise that don't support that. Technology, security concerns, that tools just can't. Either the tools are not secure enough, or there are fears that have not been addressed within the community that's being organized, or within the organizers in adopting a new tool. I imagine that Finnish is one of those languages that doesn't get as much support as it should across these tools. And from Jordan, outvote relational organizing tools is definitely a big one that we've seen a lot of folks coming to us asking for help adopting, and a lot of struggles in implementing that. If anybody has additional stumbling blocks that you've run into, feel free to drop those in the chat as well. But basically, there's a lot of reasons why this is hard. And so if I'm gonna assume that most people who are on this call are here because you've had some struggles in getting your organization to adopt the tools that it needs. And so this is the slide that's here to tell you, you should not feel bad about that, and you are not alone. This is, we did not find a single organization that did not have some struggles with technology adoption. And usually there were multiple. We also found that most new technology projects, fail before the tools ever get used. But there's a number of different places where a number of different fail points. And so I think, one place where we need to change the way that we think a little bit about technology adoption is there's often this mindset of you find the tool and you buy it and you're done, right? It's like, as soon as it's done, everything's good, right? And what we found was that there were, that there were a lot of technology projects that were failing because of issues that came up way before purchasing, where you didn't have the team that was on the same page about why the tool was needed or how it was going to be used in the organization, right? You just didn't have the skills or the staffing on board to make this a successful process. And then a lot were happening, a lot of projects were stumbling after purchase. So they were, stumbling at the point of just not finding the capacity to get it all the way set up so that it's fully useful, folks not getting the training that they needed. And then the part that we're going to really focus on today is the implementation piece of things, is about the rollout side of it, because you can get all the way through those other pieces, and you get to training and rollout, and have a great tool that collects dust. If we're not as thoughtful as we need to be about how we're doing that training and how we're doing that rollout. Okay, we have a participant saying a lot of folks that I'm working with complain about the number of tools they're being asked to use. Yeah, that's it. That's a great point. Definitely hear that a lot. Lack of integration and vision of the process. I think both of those are some of those are great examples of some of those stumbling blocks that happen really early on, where there's jumping ahead to, you know, we need a distributed events tool. What are the best distributed events tools out there, without actually thinking about, well, hold on a second, who's going to organize those distributed events? Like, that's got to be our members are going to have to do that. And we're already asking our members to learn how to use Hustle and learn how to do these, you know, 3 other things. And then the data is not even going to talk to each other because those tools don't have native integrations, right? So that taking the time and having that vision, building the consensus up front, that can really like stay under the surface, and not actually, you know, become apparent that those pieces weren't there until you're at the far end and people are getting really frustrated with, why are you asking me to use this thing? This doesn't, you know, this doesn't work for me. You're asking too much. It doesn't talk to the other thing you're asking me to use, that sort of thing. So those are great points. Thank you for raising both of those. And let me just say that I'm super, you know, it's really important to address each of these points. If you're interested in talking more about some of the earlier phases and challenges that you're having there, I will drop my email into the chat. I think there are probably other ways for you to get it as well. But feel free to reach out to me, and super happy to talk about those, because it's this. I do believe I would not have we would not have submitted this training if we didn't believe that today's topic was not super important. And it's also, it cannot be in isolation, and we can't do it without talking about the fact that we need that organizations need adequate staffing to use technology, and funders need to fund, you know, the digital and data capacity, the people. They need to invest in the people, and having the time, having the know-how to do this work, if it's going to be successful, and have a lot of thoughts around staffing and selection and visioning and all that stuff. So I'm happy to talk about those other things in a offline. But so let's talk about this sort of next piece of, you found the right tech for your team. How do you get them to actually use it? So this is where we get to the Candy Crush part. I swear it was not entirely just clickbait here. So Candy Crush is, you know, I still see people playing Candy Crush, which is a pretty remarkable lifespan, since in putting together this presentation, realized that it's been out for almost a decade. But, you know, it's one of those first really viral, cell phone games. And it has like made an impression on me personally, because it first made an impression on me because I lived in New York City and spent 2 hours a day on the subway when it came out. And I remember just spending my entire subway ride watching other people play Candy Crush, because I was so sucked into and entranced by what was happening on their screen. But it's in sort of talking about and thinking about some of the lessons from it, we did some research, and there's actually some like some scholarship on Candy Crush and why it's such an effective game that is super applicable to organizing. And so just a couple of like key concepts to focus on here. So unusual player demographics for a video game, super widely played across, it's a predominantly female player base, wide age range. It brings folks in who are not usually, at least targeted by the video game industry as much, and maybe less likely adopters of video games. And it employs a couple of principles. So one is there's just these constant positive feedback loops. So that's what we're looking at on this screen here. Every single time that you swipe, you swipe your candy, you get it aligned, and you get these really fun effects every time. You get points, you get electricity, you get fish, I guess. And every one of those things gives you a little burst of dopamine, a little bit of good job, right? Which creates this positive feedback loop that makes you want to keep doing it. And then the other thing is that each level, it adds complexity. So the first level that you play is pretty simple. And the more that you play it, the more features that are added on, and the more complex that it gets. So if you haven't played Candy Crush, those are the things that you need to understand. You've probably played or seen people playing games that employ the same principles. And it is something that's starting to be built into technology that we use, that some of us are using in the movement. I think less so in like specifically advocacy or organizing tools. But if you think about something like if anybody uses Asana, I realize I left this slide out. I wanted to show an image of it, but it's a project management tool that every time or every few times that you check off a task, a unicorn or something like that flies across the screen to celebrate your big achievement, and again give you that positive reinforcement. So how does this apply to adopting technology in our organizations? So we're going to go back to those two key ideas. Those are both applicable when we're rolling out a new tool. Some tools that we use are pretty simple, but especially when we're talking about something that's a little bit more complicated, especially if you're talking about like training your team on a new, a new organizing CRM or advocacy tool set. But even, remembering that you may be on this call because you are in a role of leading some of this work of thinking about how technology can be used in your work. But a lot of the folks who need to use that technology, if they're volunteers, if they're members, if they're field staff, may have a lot less of that experience, and so even a simple tool is maybe really intimidating, and there's actually a lot of different features there. So we can break that down into these bite-sized modules, and we can provide positive feedback loops along the way. So let me give a specific example here, and I'm gonna see if I can actually stick with using the pseudonym rather than the real person's name here. Little bits of dopamine, exactly. Yeah, this is a real example of an organization that we worked with. And we spent time with folks, throughout the organization. So community organization that was doing, some real block by block community organizing, And they had these really amazing organizers who were so great at going out and, and talking to folks, radicalizing them, getting them to talk to their neighbors, and building little neighborhood committees. And they were doing it in a super analog kind of way. And the leadership of the organization was frustrated because they couldn't, they had funders who wanted to know, how many doors did you knock this year? How many people are in these committees? And it was really hard for them to get good numbers on that, or be able to make data-driven decisions of like, this campaign seems to be really working. People seem to engage more around this tactic, because you had these community organizers who were keeping lists of people on paper or in their phones, and then at the end of the month doing this really laborious process of tallying, trying to tally things up and trying to give a sense of what those top line organizing numbers were. And so leadership was like, we need reporting, get us your reports, and we need a tool that's going to make it so that we get better reports, and we're able to make the decisions that we need to make, which is super important. And we want to put more powerful tools in your hands as well. But what this, one of these organizers that we were talking to, was initially not really bought into the project, because he wasn't making those decisions, right? But as we talked to him, we realized what he really needed was he needed to be able to text all those people he was organizing way faster than he could, using just the texting app on his phone. He needed to be able to send, the same message, maybe with a little bit of personalization, to a bunch of people, and be able to keep track of RSVPs for meetings. And so, we looked at this, and realized that there's a disconnect, that was going to potentially pose a problem with the rollout, because the pattern that we see over and over and over again, is that when you have a disconnect like this, when you actually get to the rollout part of things, the training and the rollout are designed around what one person or one part of the organization prioritizes, and then people who are being trained, if they didn't design that, don't necessarily see the relevance and may, sort of divest from the project, and then you're really in trouble. So the approach was to think about those Candy Crush moments for every person at this organization. And we sort of broke it down by job function and thought through, in the first week, first few weeks, first month of using this tool, of rolling out this tool, what are the moments when we can give folks that little dopamine rush of, I did something, I was successful in using this, that was fun, right? And then working from that to think about what's the minimum that they need to know to get to that moment, rather than what's everything that they need to know about this tool to use it fully. Let's start with those Candy Crush moments, and let's think about what they need to know. So for example, for an organizer like Carlos, we knew that the Candy Crush moment for him was going to be when he got to use the new SMS tool that they were adopting, to easily text a whole bunch of the members that he was organizing more quickly, right? And so in designing the training and the rollout for that, we focused it just on those bare minimum functions. We sort of thought through that process. How do you log into the texting tool? How do you find your list of members that you're organizing? How do you begin texting, right? That might not even include, creating the script if this is a peer-to-peer texting app like Hustle, for example, right? That might just really be that bare minimum. And it was definitely not all these other pieces about the reporting, right? Managing the list, doing bulk uploads, things like that. We, left all that out from that initial training. And then the goal is for this to be sort of a modular approach. And so each step along the way, you add a little bit more complexity. And so the next module also needs to have a Candy Crush moment in it. And that next Candy Crush moment might be, that, as I mentioned, that process of developing the reports, very time consuming, right? And so what if we can make that process much faster, right? That could be a Candy Crush moment, is when he's able to send the monthly report and get it done in 30 minutes instead of 3 hours, right? And so then there's another module that's put together that's all about that reporting piece of things. And then they can be pieced together until you have a team that's fully trained and fully bought in to how to use this new technology. Just to kind of summarize again, we really, really, really need to think holistically about this technology adoption question. And I definitely say this, if there happen to be any funders on the call, you are a big part of the solution here, because it's not going to happen without resources. And this is a big time commitment. But if we think about the amount of time that we lose in starting to adopt a tool that never really gets used, or only half using it, it's worth it in the long run. It's just, hard to make that initial investment. But we need to think holistically about the full process, make sure that we're staffing it, make sure that we're thinking it all the way through, making sure that we're addressing all of those barriers that usually get in the way, and extending that all the way through rollout at the end. And then when we actually get to that point, which, when you get to that point, pat yourself on the back, but then remember that if you've led the process of finding the right tool and figuring out how it's going to work in your organization and getting it set up, that's really great. And you need other folks to use it for it to be successful. And in order for them to be bought in and feel successful and feel like this is their tool, using the Candy Crush approach to break it into bite-sized modules and make sure that there's a positive feedback loop is a really great way to make sure that you don't lose people along the way. So I think we're a little bit ahead of schedule here, but I'm gonna stop there for questions. See if I can get the chat to come back up. I think age is also a barrier. Yeah, great question. I think that age can be a barrier, but I think there's a complicated answer to that, because I would say maybe not the age, but the willingness to use tech. Yeah, I think that's important. I think that is the more important factor. I do think that there is there's a couple real pieces around age. One, that a lot of technology is designed, we have to think about who's actually designing and building our technology. And I think that there's been a lot of really good conversation about this, and there's things very much headed in the right direction in the progressive space, but we're not always using tools built in the progressive space. And a lot of technology was built by people who look like me. And so it was built for people who look like me. And so that means that, anybody who, anybody who is not a, young, white, affluent man is going to, there may be parts of a tool that are not designed as well for you. There's subtle ways that come up, and there's been research about this, about the assumptions of how you interact with user interface, for example, that get built in, that we need to be more thoughtful about. But all of that said, it doesn't need to be a barrier. It doesn't need to be a barrier because we can build better tools, but it doesn't need to be a barrier because we can be, because there are people of all ages who are super willing to use technology. And if we can come at it with an approach that makes people feel empowered and feel like these are their tools, and age is not, we're not going to treat age as a barrier. And then we can actually provide a training and a rollout process that is supportive and meets people wherever they are. Then I think that we don't need to leave anybody behind. I think, what kind of dopamine creating rewards do you set up for each level? IRL rewards, intrinsic and built into the app. So that's something that we've wanted to experiment with. The only sort of IRL rewards that we've seen be used and be helpful is just sort of the celebration of success, which, if there are any teachers on the call, probably have much more developed thoughts around this. But just lifting up, check out how many times how many people this person texted, check out this great, how well the event registration went for this event led by this person, and lifting up people's success is the one thing that we've seen, really be helpful. But if anybody has other thoughts, public celebration within the group, again, just providing that feedback loop of I want to use this thing more because that was nice when I got praised in front of everybody. And if you can do that public celebration in a way that it's not individualistic, but it's lifting up the success of the team, that's even better. How can we create a Candy Crush moment without rebuilding solutions already deployed? Okay, so you're, although if I am understanding you correctly, you're asking how does this apply to better adopting tools that you're already using? Is that right? Cool. That's a super good question. I feel like I don't have a great answer to that. So if anybody feels like they do have a great answer to that, please drop that in the chat. One thing that's really hard is just, and I imagine, other folks have experienced this. People get discouraged, right? And at some point, if you've had a bad experience with a technology enough times, you get that sense of feeling of you get that little pit in your stomach every time you start to type Salesforce into the URL into your browser, right? And then people start to think, no, I don't use Salesforce because it's not it's not good for me. It's not helpful for me. I'm only doing that because, because that other department says that I'm supposed to, or my boss says that I'm supposed to. And changing the way that people feel emotionally towards a technology is hard. So that's why I feel like I don't have a really great answer to this, because there's just like a leadership challenge of getting folks on board with the idea that we're going to we're starting fresh with this tool, and all of the bad experiences that you've had, we're going to put those in the past, and we're going to try this again and see if we can develop a new relationship to it. Because once, if you can sort of do that new take that new stab at it, then everything applies. It's still getting people that first taste of success is still the key, and maybe it's like stopping to think, and talk to people about the tool that you're struggling with, and figure out what are the areas that they have had success, if any, and if not, like why not, and then trying to design some of these initial modules based on that, of like, what, I feel really confident that at least this small little bit of it they could be successful at if set up for it, and see if the relationship starts to change towards the tool once you've had a couple of those. I've definitely struggled with getting volunteers and staff to manage too many tools. Do you have any advice on striking the right balance? That's a really hard question. These questions are just getting harder and harder here. Any advice on striking the right balance? I mean, I think one piece of advice, is, often if folks are feeling that way, it means that they're still struggling with at least one of the tools that they're currently using, or their relationship towards that tool feels like an obligation rather than something that's empowering or useful to them. So I would recommend like trying to get to the bottom of that. You can see people change their relationship over time, where when people say I'm using too many tools, they'll usually list some tools and they're going to leave stuff out that they feel super comfortable with, right? Some of that might be just like things that aren't organizing technology, like I'm super comfortable texting my friends, to come to an event. But that is a piece of technology that they had to learn and stop thinking about as like a list of the tools that they have to use to do, their whatever you're asking them to do. So I think that my best advice is like, try to figure out what are the places that are feeling hard or frustrating, and try to address those before introducing something new. And then, which is probably like not the most satisfying advice. So I guess another pretty unsatisfying piece of advice is, just making sure that we're asking ourselves really, critically, like, is this something that technology is needed for? This is what our firm does. And I also see see myself slipping into relying on technology-driven solutions when they're not, at times when they're not truly necessary. And sometimes your volunteers have a point that they, maybe there is a perfectly good way to do it without tech. I realized neither of those were super satisfying, so I'll keep thinking on that one, and let you know if anything else comes to mind or if anybody else has something. Okay, a few minutes remaining left. yeah, we're gonna wrap up here shortly. Any reading suggestions on this topic? You know, um, we have some writing that we're working on putting out that will be published on our website hopefully soon. There's a couple of things that if you send me an email, I can send you both the original research on Candy Crush, which I think is kind of interesting to read. And then there's some interesting, there's some other resources that we rely on, like the research around product teams that Sam Dorman and other folks have done, thinking around how to appropriately staff a project like this for it to be successful. So that's, I can send a couple of things, but you know, this, if anybody has seen this written about somewhere, please send it to me, because this feels like new territory that we've been feeling out. And it sounds like Auntie, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name right, but you've had some success with getting folks of a range of ages to use a mobile app. Would love to see that if you're up for sharing what the app is. That's great that you've got some small gamification aspects into it. And yeah, there's lots that's been written about gamification. Yeah, you probably have more knowledge about that on the, you know, how do you build it into the technology side? And to some extent, we're just in a place right now where we have to think about how do we replicate that when we're working with tools that don't have that built in. All right. Any last questions? Okay, that's not available. All right, well, thank you for sharing everything that you shared. Thank you everybody for coming on a Saturday morning. Really appreciate it. And thank you Netroots for hosting this. Recordings, Barbara or Alana or anybody, can you answer the recording question? I actually don't know the answer to that. Recordings will be online. So I think there'll be information, check your email in a few days about that. But thank you all, and have a great Saturday.